Don King made millions promoting some of boxing's greatest champions, but many of them eventually took him to court. Muhammad Ali sued over missing money. Terry Norris demanded $70 million, and Mike Tyson came after King for a staggering $100 million. These are the champions who sued Don King. Don King built his entire boxing career on the back of Muhammad Ali, and it was Ali who became the first champion to take him to court. In 1982, after Ali's career had wound down following his loss to Larry Holmes, Ali filed a lawsuit alleging he'd been shortchanged on his purse. Muhammad Ali took King to court in 1982, alleging that he had been underpaid, to the tune of $1.1 million. The fight in question was Ali's 1980 bout against Holmes. King had shortchanged Ali by over $1 million for his next-to-last fight, the inglorious 1980 loss to Larry Holmes, and a month after Ali had sued to recover the money, King made his move. What happened next is one of the most repeated stories in boxing history, and it's not a flattering one for King. According to Jack Newfield's biography of the promoter, King once cleverly diffused the pending $1.2 million Muhammad Ali lawsuit with a magic suitcase containing $50,000 in cash. King didn't deliver it himself. Instead, King summoned a henchman named Jeremiah Shabazz, who had been Ali's original Muslim teacher, to his office and handed him the suitcase. The instructions were blunt. King told Shabazz to give the cash to Ali, but only after getting him to sign a document ending the lawsuit. Ali was not in good health at the time. According to Shabazz, Ali was ailing by then and mumbling a lot. I guess he needed the money. Shabazz followed through. Ali signed, and just like that, a $1.1 million claim disappeared for a fraction of its value. Whether it was because he needed cash or because his health was failing, Ali signed away his $1 million lawsuit for a mere $50,000. The letter Ali signed didn't just end the case. It also handed King the rights to promote any future Ali fights, tying the aging champion to King even as his career came to a close. The fallout from that moment reportedly reached Ali's own legal team. Ali's lawyer cried when he learned that Ali had ended the lawsuit without telling him. It's a detail that captures just how quietly and completely King had operated, cutting out not just the courts, but Ali's own representation to make the case vanish. Some retellings put the settlement figure slightly higher, describing an amount around $1.2 million short, on a guaranteed $8 million purse, with King eventually getting an out-of-court settlement for just $100,000. But every version of the story lands on the same outcome. A champion who generated hundreds of millions for the sport, settling a seven-figure claim for pennies on the dollar, under circumstances that raised eyebrows even among King's allies. Ali wasn't a one-off. He was the template. King had figured out early that champions could be managed, promoted, and, when necessary, settled with cash and paperwork rather than full restitution. It's a playbook that would repeat itself with variations for the next 3 decades. Take Larry Holmes, the man who beat Ali in that very 1980 fight. Holmes had his own accounting complaints, and they went back years before he ever filed anything formal. Holmes said he received only $150,000 from a contracted $500,000 for his fight with Ken Norton, received only $50,000 from a reported $200,000 for facing Ernie Shavers, was underpaid $2 million for his fight with Muhammad Ali, that King cut his purse by $700,000 for his fight with Tex Cobb, and was underpaid $250,000 for fighting Leon Spinks. Those are 5 separate fights. 5 separate shortfalls, all under King's promotion. The dispute that finally reached a courtroom stemmed from Holmes' fight against Jerry Cooney. After a title bout with Jerry Cooney, Larry Holmes was shortchanged some $300,000 by King. Holmes eventually sued, and according to some accounts he was doing so while King was managing Michael Jackson's Victory Tour, for a flagrant and fraudulent attempt to withhold a large sum of money. The Cooney fight wasn't the only dispute. Holmes also sued King over the accounting and auditing for that fight, charging that he was underpaid by $3 million. There was another round years later, this time tied to Holmes fighting Mike Tyson. Holmes sued King after King deducted a $300,000 finder's fee from his fight purse against Mike Tyson. Holmes settled for $150,000 and also signed a legal agreement, pledging not to give any more negative information about King to reporters. That gag clause became something of a King signature. Settle the money dispute. then make sure the fighter can't talk about it publicly afterward. Holmes never held back when he did speak about King outside those agreements. He's been quoted comparing King's appearance to something sinister, reportedly saying King's hair sticks up to hide his horns, a line that stuck around in boxing circles for years as shorthand for how bitter that relationship became. Between the Cooney shortfall, the Tyson Finders fee dispute, and the years of accounting complaints stretching back to Norton and Shavers, Holmes represents one of the longest, most drawn-out champion versus promoter fights in King's history. It wasn't one lawsuit. It was a pattern that spanned nearly his entire heavyweight reign. If Ali and Holmes showed the world that King's biggest stars weren't immune to getting shortchanged, Tim Witherspoon's case showed just how deep the pattern could go, even for a fighter who won the heavyweight title while under King's banner. Witherspoon's central complaint was about proportions, not just missing dollars. Witherspoon alleged that he was tricked into handing over more than 80% of his fight money to King and his associates, much more than is allowed by law. That's not a rounding error or a disputed bonus clause. That's the vast majority of a professional athlete's earnings being funneled away from him, according to the boxer's own account. The dispute traces back to specific fights. Witherspoon was promised $550,000 for his 1986 title bout with Frank Bruno, but ended up with a little over $90,000. King's side told a different story. King contended that he had funneled numerous purse advances to Witherspoon, and that, in fact, the fighter got everything that was due to him. That back and forth, advances versus withheld purses, became a common defense King used across nearly every one of these cases. He'd argue the money had already gone out the door in other forms, making it nearly impossible for fighters to reconstruct exactly what they were owed. Witherspoon didn't just have his purse disputed, he says he was financially squeezed on the training side too. Witherspoon was also forced to train at King's own gym at a cost rather than train elsewhere for free. Every dollar leaving the fighter's pocket, in other words, seemed to find its way back toward King's businesses one way or another. When Witherspoon finally sued, he went big. After suing King for more than $25 million, he eventually settled outside of court for $1 million. A $25 million ask, settling for a fraction of that, isn't unusual in litigation generally. But layered on top of Ali's suitcase and Holmes's repeated shortfalls, it reinforced a very consistent shape to these disputes. Massive claims, quiet settlements, and King's business continuing largely uninterrupted. Other reporting on the settlement described it slightly differently in scale, but consistently in outcome. Witherspoon, who became heavyweight champion under King, reportedly received an out-of-court settlement worth more than $1 million. Whether the final number was closer to $1 million or included in that broader figure, the fighter who once wore a heavyweight belt walked away from his promoter's organization, having had to fight in court just to collect a purse he'd already earned in the ring. Witherspoon's case matters because it wasn't a fringe fighter or a one-fight opponent complaining about a bad night. This was a heavyweight champion, someone King had built up, promoted, and profited from at the highest level of the sport, turning around and suing him for the majority of his own career earnings. And it happened during the same stretch of years that Holmes and Ali were doing exactly the same thing. By the mid-1980s, King wasn't dealing with an isolated dispute. He was dealing with a pattern that his own champions, one after another, were independently identifying and taking to court. There's also the darker edge to how King allegedly dealt with fighters who pushed back too hard, and it shows up most starkly in the case of junior welterweight and junior middleweight champion Meldrick Taylor. According to fellow promoter Don Elbaum, Meldrick Taylor was promised a purse of $1.3 million, but was presented with a check for $300,000. When Taylor pushed back on the shortfall, the response allegedly went well beyond a contract dispute. According to Elbaum, when Taylor protested, King threatened to have him killed. That allegation didn't stay buried. Years later, it resurfaced publicly when ESPN aired a documentary repeating the claim, describing how the network's special accused King of threatening to break the legs of heavyweight Larry Holmes and of cheating boxer Meldrick Taylor out of $1 million from a fight and then threatening to have Taylor killed. The claim was serious enough and repeated enough that it became one of the central allegations King himself would later try to fight in court. But that's a story for later in this script. For now, What matters is this: Taylor's dispute over his purse sits alongside Witherspoon's, Holmes, and Ali's as another champion-level fighter under King's banner, who found himself on the wrong end of a check that didn't match the number he'd been promised. By the mid-1990s, King had already weathered disputes with Ali, Holmes, Witherspoon, and Taylor. Then came Terry Norris, a former WBC super welterweight champion, who took King on in what became one of the longest and most damaging legal fights of King's career. Norris's case began in 1996. In 1996, Terry Norris sued King, alleging that King had stolen money from him and conspired with his manager to underpay him for fights. The manager in question was Norris's own trainer, and the allegation had a specific financial hook. Norris alleged the two conspired to pay him less than what he should have made for fights, after his manager borrowed $200,000 from King in 1994. In other words, Norris's claim wasn't just that King underpaid him directly. It was that King had effectively bought influence over Norris's own management team, using a loan to his manager as leverage to control how much of Norris's own purse actually reached him. The number Norris put on the total damage was enormous. In 1997, Terry Norris sued King for $70 million in damages, and beyond the money, he also demanded an end to what was described as a horribly one-sided and unfair contract. This wasn't just about one short-changed purse. Norris was attacking the entire structure of how King's promotional contracts worked. The case dragged on for years. The settlement in the 7-year case might encourage other fighters to sue the promoter, according to Norris's attorney Judd Burstein, and it very nearly went the distance. The case reached an actual jury before it settled. Promoter Don King agreed to pay former champion Terry Norris US $7.5 million on Wednesday, just as a jury was debating the boxer's claim that King stole money from him. That's about as close to a full trial verdict as any of King's fighter disputes ever got. The jury was already weighing the case when King moved to cut a deal, rather than risk what they'd decide. The terms were specific and sizable. King agreed to pay $3 million by next week, and the remainder within 15 months. And unlike some of King's earlier settlements, like the one that quietly buried Ali's claim, Norris made sure this one couldn't be swept under the rug. King also conceded to Norris's insistence that the settlement be made public. The human cost behind the case made it land differently than the earlier disputes too. Norris's attorney pointed out that Norris, who has brain damage from punches, had no money left from a career in which he made millions in purses. A fighter who'd absorbed the physical toll of a boxing career, only to find the money that was supposed to be waiting for him afterward simply wasn't there. Burstein didn't mince words about what the case meant for King's business going forward, telling reporters he believed it was the beginning of the end for Don King, adding that a lot of people now realize he can be held accountable for what he's done. Norris's $7.5 million settlement instantly became the largest confirmed payout King had made to a single fighter up to that point, dwarfing Witherspoon's $1 million and Holmes's $150,000 deals. And it set a benchmark that the very next major lawsuit against King would blow past entirely. If Norris's case was long, Mike Tyson's was seismic. The biggest, most public, most financially staggering lawsuit any champion ever filed against Don King. The relationship between Tyson and King had been close, even paternal in public appearances, for years. That made the collapse all the more dramatic. Heavyweight champion Mike Tyson sued legendary boxing promoter Don King and his company, Don King Productions, in federal district court for $100 million, accusing King of fraud and conversion. The lawsuit didn't stop at general fraud. It got specific. Tyson also accused King of concealing revenue from the sale of the non-US broadcast rights of Tyson fights. The origin of the dispute traced back to Tyson's release from prison in the mid-1990s. The legendary heavyweight alleged that following his 1995 prison release, the promoter stole upwards of $100 million from him. The scale of money moving through Tyson's fights at that time was almost hard to comprehend. For perspective, the 1996 rematch between Tyson and Evander Holyfield, the one where Tyson bit a chunk of Holyfield's ear off, earned $180 million alone. If King was skimming even a fraction of the revenue flowing through fights at that scale, Tyson's $100 million claim wasn't far-fetched at all. Tyson's complaint went beyond simple accounting disputes, too. He alleged the conditions under which he'd signed some of his contracts were coercive in a very literal sense. Tyson also alleged that King made him sign contracts while he was in jail, never giving him the opportunity to seek a lawyer's advice on the matter. The case became so central to the boxing world's view of King that it kept surfacing in unrelated litigation. During Lennox Lewis's own separate lawsuit against King over an alleged plot to keep Tyson from fighting Lewis in a rematch, Lewis's attorneys pointed directly at the Tyson case as leverage, alleging King was desperate to keep Tyson close because he feared the financial hit. The suit claims King is desperate to get Tyson back because he fears losing the $100 million lawsuit Tyson filed against him when they split, with the case scheduled to go to trial and attorneys for Lewis claiming King feared it would bankrupt him. The Tyson case ground on for 6 years before it ever reached a verdict. Perhaps the most famous was Mike Tyson's $100 million lawsuit started in 1998, after the boxer claimed King had been siphoning the money from his earnings for fights after he was released from prison in 1995. The case finally ended 6 years later when Tyson accepted a settlement for $14 million. $14 million is a fraction of the original ask, but it was still by a wide margin, the largest confirmed dollar settlement King had ever paid to a single fighter, nearly double what he'd paid Norris just months earlier. King, for his part, never really apologized for any of it. Asked repeatedly about the wave of lawsuits from his former champions, he offered a line that's been quoted in nearly every retrospective written about him since. "They spend their money, then they get mad at me for keeping mine." It's a quote that tells you everything about how King viewed these cases, not as evidence of wrongdoing, but as buyer's remorse from fighters who'd blown through the money themselves. Tyson didn't limit his response to the courtroom either. Years after the settlement, he was still venting about King in interviews, once describing his former promoter in some of the harshest terms any fighter ever used publicly, saying King would betray anyone, even family, for money. It was a level of personal bitterness that outlasted the legal case itself by decades. Tyson's $14 million settlement closed the lawsuit, but it never closed the wound. By the time Tyson's case wrapped up, King had been sued, in one form or another, by nearly every champion who ever fought under his banner. Ali, Holmes, Witherspoon, Norris, Tyson, and more. And yet King's response to all of it wasn't to retreat from the spotlight. It was to go on offense. In 2005, King flipped the entire dynamic and became the plaintiff instead of the defendant. Boxing promoter Don King filed a $2.5 billion defamation suit, claiming he was portrayed in a false light on an ESPN Sports Century segment. The documentary had compiled essentially the entire history of complaints against him into one broadcast. The suit named ESPN, ABC, cable networks, Advocate Communications, and Disney as defendants, claiming King was falsely portrayed as a con artist and a thug. The documentary's specific allegations were the same ones that had defined King's legal history for decades. The lawsuit says the program accused King of being a snake oil salesman, a shameless huckster, and worse, claimed the flamboyant promoter underpaid Muhammad Ali by $1.2 million, and repeated the Meldrick Taylor allegations from years earlier, that King had cheated Taylor and threatened him. King's attorney insisted the special was unfair, telling reporters it was slanted to show Don in the worst way. It was one-sided from day one. Don is a strong man, but he has been hurt by this. The courts didn't agree with King. The case was dismissed on summary judgment, with a finding that King couldn't show actual malice from the defendants. A Florida appeals court later upheld that dismissal, confirming that the mountain of allegations from Ali to Holmes to Taylor to Tyson could be broadcast without legal consequence for the network that aired them, because none of it, in the court's eyes, was demonstrably false or malicious. King's appetite for litigation never really faded, even decades later. In 2024, he found himself back in the news over the very event that made him famous in the first place. A lawsuit against famed boxing promoter Don King sought more than $3 billion, alleging King falsely denied being involved in an anniversary event for his historic Rumble in the Jungle. The suit came from a promoter who claimed the two of them had spent over a year planning a 50th anniversary sequel event, before King's company issued a cease and desist denying any involvement. The companies filed the complaint in federal court against King, then 93, alleging defamation, tortious interference, and fraud. That case, still working through the courts, is a reminder that King's litigation history never really became a closed book. It just kept adding chapters. And the boxers of his prime years, the ones who built his empire and then took him to court to reclaim pieces of it, never fully got the reckoning that Judd Burstein predicted when the Norris case settled. King never went to prison for any of the underpayment allegations. He was never convicted in the fraud and tax cases prosecutors brought against him over the years, walking away from those largely unscathed, even as the boxers around him kept winning settlements, one after another, outside a courtroom. What actually changed, fight by fight and lawsuit by lawsuit, was smaller than a full reckoning, but real all the same. Ali's suitcase settlement is remembered today as one of the most cited examples of how badly a promoter could take advantage of a fighter, and it's become a cautionary tale cited in boxing reform discussions ever since. Norris's insistence that his settlement be made public broke the pattern of quiet, sealed deals that had let King absorb complaint after complaint without lasting damage to his reputation. Tyson's $14 million, still the largest confirmed payout on record, put a number on just how much money could move through a promoter's hands without a fighter ever seeing it. None of it stopped King from promoting fights well into his 80s, and none of it stopped new legal fights over old events, old friendships, old money, from finding him even in his 90s. The champions who sued him got their settlements. What they never got was an admission. And the man who once said fighters spend their money and then get mad at him for keeping his kept right on saying it, one lawsuit at a time.